Find a seat, please. Find a seat and then sit in the seat. Okay, everybody's got their cell phone off. Yeah, I'm Bill Cordero, Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs, and my primary job is to lead the Martin V. Smith School of Business and Economics. I see a lot of familiar faces. I know you like this series. Welcome to the first of the series in the fall semester. We have three other speakers set for the spring semester also. We put on your chair the announcement because in only a couple weeks we're going to have a number 2 speaker. You've heard of, it doesn't say it anywhere on there, but you've heard of Progressive Insurance, you know, all those advertisements. If you wondered about their spot discounts and all that stuff, really it's a billing based on use of vehicle and experience and all of that. So you might wonder how they do that. There's actually an implanted electronic device that tracks all kinds of metrics, most of which I don't know and they wouldn't tell me about. But the man that's going to come and speak is the inventor and has a local company that deals, and Progressive is one of their big customers. He probably won't talk too much about Progressive, but I've had lunch with him and interviewed him, and it'll be a fascinating conversation about how he and his colleagues have developed these devices. So we asked that you look at that because it's only in a couple weeks. So I wanted to give you a heads up. Martin V. Smith School of Business and Economics. You know that I always thank the Smith family for their generous gift. First, Bud Smith, which a lot of you probably knew, in the late 90s. And then the Smith family, Cindy Daly, Vicki Posey, Margie Teglin, and Tony Gardner. His 3 daughters increased the gift, and we named the school after the father. And I think it was 2006. And that support allows us to do lots of things for our students, and including this speaker series. Speaker series is organized by the Business Advisory Council of the Smith School. Rob Westberg is the current chair, and we have a committee that deals with the speaking events, and Paul Carter is the chair of that, so I want to thank them. And of course, Maritha Steth, where is she? In the back there, indispensable organizer for the university. We wouldn't be here without her, so we thank her for doing this. Rick Cole is the former city manager of Ventura. I met him a couple of months ago, and he told me at that time that he'd be leaving the city, and had just a delightful conversation and said, we'd like you to come and speak here. So by way of introduction, I'm going to read an editorial from September 2nd in the Ventura Star. Rick Cole, Ventura's city manager since 2004, will be calling the quits this month. Mr. Cole and Ventura Mayor Mike Tracy made the announcement in a joint statement a few days ago, revealing that the city manager had offered to resign effective September 15th in response to the City Council's desire for change. The Star hopes that at least one thing won't change after Mr. Cole's last day on the job: the high level of professionalism and integrity we've seen in the city under his management and leadership. In an era when the public has witnessed sad and shocking examples of financial abuse, cronyism, and other wrongdoings in some city governments, from elsewhere in Ventura County to that poster child of law breaking the city of Bell, residents of Ventura have been able to say with confidence and pride that their city is far better than that. Much credit belongs to the city manager and the council, who set an example and expectations for those under them. Mr. Cole led a downtown revitalization, guided Ventura through the daunting budget challenges, and oversaw important but unsexy work such as improvement of public works, water, and sewer operations. Perhaps some people didn't warm up to his personal style. I think it's just fine. And understated disciplined focus. But his leadership and high standards kindle gratitude from every corner of Ventura. Sometimes if you've come to these things, we've kind of done an interview Q&A with myself and the speaker, the guest, I mean. But Rick asked that he be given the podium to give a speech directly about public service and his views of people in public service. So without further ado, Rick Cole.
Thank you, Dean Cordero, and it truly is an honor and privilege to be here at this university and to talk about public service. And I'm happy to, when we get to the questions, address your specific questions and feedback about things that have gone on in Ventura, local government here in Ventura County. But I wanted to talk, as the Dean said, about the broader crisis in public service. Believe it or not, working in government used to be considered an honorable calling. It was called public service. Back in 1912, when the main post office in New York City was erected, they carved this motto into the stone above the stately three-story Greek columns. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night shall stay these swift couriers from the completion of their appointed rounds. 100 years ago, it was possible to borrow the stirring words of a Greek historian like Herodotus to describe the men and women who worked in humble roles at the post office. But nobody talks like that today. The Postal Service has shed 139,000 workers in the last 5 years and lost $37 billion. Nobody compares the 500,000 people who still work at the post office with Greek heroes anymore. If they compare them to anyone, they compare them to today's bankrupt Greek government. So what went wrong? Why does the public think of people in the public sector as overpaid bureaucrats instead of selfless public servants? Now, obviously, we live in cynical times. Heroes have always been imperfect. But today, the media feeds us a steady diet of disillusionment. What passes for news is filled with scandals about politicians and sports figures, and we hear about the transgressions of everyone from bankers to priests. And so it's not surprising that polls show that trust has eroded in virtually every profession amongst the public. But I think that the hostility toward public workers is too strong to simply be chalked up to jaded public attitudes. And the work of public service is far too important to let the crooks in the city of Bell become the new face of public employment. We are all of us, in deep trouble if the public comes to believe that working for government is just another way to make money with no higher ethical standards than what we see on Wall Street. It's true, we've pretty much given up expecting business to have any special loyalty to the common good or to put others ahead of themselves. If they do, that's great. If they don't, well, that's business. That's why last weekend Apple could sell 5 million iPhones in 2 days, even though everybody knows that iPhones are made by underpaid Chinese people in working conditions that Americans would not tolerate for a moment for ourselves. But if we accept cutthroat behavior from corporations and the people who lead them, does it really matter if we are equally cynical about people in government? I think it does. I believe that if we abandon the ethic of public service, we lose something essential to the American experiment. So let me illustrate why. And I'll use as my example another federal government agency, one that's even older than the post office. Founded back in 1775, the United States Marine Corps started out with a pretty limited mission. Their job was to board and capture enemy ships and defend off attacks from enemy ships on our ships. Obviously, that role has changed dramatically over the last 237 years, but the Marines remain the few and the proud. Even though they are the smallest of the four armed services, when there is trouble abroad, the first thing we think about is sending the Marines. And we know why. The Marines have a unique esprit de corps, and the Marine hymn is direct about this point. We fight our country's battles in the air, on land, and sea. First to fight for right and freedom, and to keep our honor clean. We are proud to claim the title of United States Marines. For the Marines, unselfish devotion to duty is not just some motto that they've carved in stone above the Greek columns. Marines practice those ideals under fire every day around the world. Marines are expected to risk their lives to retrieve the dead or dying body of a fellow comrade because Marines leave no one behind. And if you're a Marine, focusing on results is not some business school abstraction. It is a gung-ho commitment to taking that hill. Now, like the post office, the Marine Corps is part of the federal government, but you don't find Tea Party activists castigating the Marines for feeding at the public trough. And you don't hear angry taxpayers denouncing the Marines for being overpaid. We know Marines are human like everybody else. But they earn our respect because we know they are committed to something more honorable than earning a paycheck. So if we still honor the high ideals of our fighting forces, what happened to the high ideals of those who serve us here at home? What about the people who run our national parks, or those who teach in our public schools, or the public workers who protect our environment and the ones who fix our streets, the public servants who administer justice in our courts, and those who run our public colleges and universities, those who provide the food that we just ate at lunch here today? Shouldn't they be proud to claim their titles? Shouldn't they keep their honor clean? In a world where other nations are fighting to rid themselves of crooked governments, isn't it time we reclaim the honor of public work in America? I think it is. And so, let me pose 3 challenges for us here today. This is not a responsibility we can shove off to Congress or blame on the media. This is our job. Cal State University, Channel Islands, is a public university just a decade old. What an extraordinary achievement to turn a state mental institution into a thriving community teaching the best minds to learn to run and to work in the economy of California, the 9th largest in the world. I want to call on that same spirit for the challenge of reclaiming respect for California's shrinking public workforce because of the vital services they provide to the 37 million people who live here. So, here's my first challenge. It's to live our own lives according to our ideals. Now, I know that's easy to say, and people have been saying that for 2,500 years or so, but that's really my point. Cynical times breed cynical behaviors. Idealistic times foster idealistic behaviors. Gandhi was right when he recognized that India could not achieve home rule as a nation until the Indian people accepted self-rule as a principle. Be the change you want to see, he preached, And that remains the only reliable way to change the world for the better. Now, not everybody should go into government. But if any of you students want to protect the environment or improve the lives of the most vulnerable people in our society, or safeguard the quality of life and the standard of living of the people in the 9th largest economy in the world, then you should consider a career in public service. The public sector is not some backwater of lackluster, self-serving bureaucrats who spend their days dreaming up regulations to hobble business and impinge on your freedoms. Our schools, our courts, and our city halls need young, motivated, skilled, and idealistic young people to take the place of those of us who are moving on. You can make a difference every day. You won't find easy money or celebrity glamour, but you can find fulfilling jobs that contribute to the well-being of your fellow citizens and the betterment of the planet we share. So here's the second challenge. Let's stop thinking about government from the standpoint of what's in it for me, and let's start thinking about it from the standpoint of what's in it for us. That's not a task just for people who work in government. That's a challenge for every American. There have been times when we understood this. Martin Luther King said, "Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." So when we talk about the 99% or the 47%, that only serves to divide us. It has left our nation more polarized than we have been for more than 70 years. And this partisan tactic of excoriating opponents has nearly destroyed public trust in public service. Both the Tea Party and the Occupy movement seem to feel that the ends of their utopias justify blistering attacks on everyone that they oppose. They have set a tone of uncivil discourse. The right demonizes public employee unions as greedy union thugs, and the left excoriates corporations as rapacious crooks. These dueling caricatures are then endlessly regurgitated in mindless television commercials at campaign time. So is it any wonder that the well of democracy is poisoned? The ancient Romans realized that desolation is not victory. When you leave a desert, you can't call that success. And so destroying democracy to win an election is too great a cost. Now, it's tempting to turn away from this sordid spectacle, whether out of disgust or despair. But that also comes at too great a cost. Self-government has never been easy. But at our best, Americans have always rallied to what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. Our challenge today is to reclaim the high ground and restore public service as an honorable calling. Nothing is more urgent than to actively resist this destructive mindlessness in American civic and political life. And so that brings me to the third and final challenge for you today, and it's aimed particularly at those of you who work at this great university. My experience has been in California local government, so I hesitate to speak too broadly about the 22 million other Americans who work in the public sector, whether they're state university staff or New York City firefighters or Chicago teachers. But I don't think those of us who work in local government here in California are that much different from those who follow public service across America. So here, I think those of us who work in public sector jobs need to acknowledge our own unintentional contribution to the problem. Look, we live in a complicated world. Managing multi-million-dollar budgets is actually more complex than balancing the family checkbook. Successfully planning a city's infrastructure or safely operating a wastewater treatment plant, those are skills beyond most ordinary citizens. Amateurs cannot plan and operate the multifunctional public safety agencies that provide 24 emergency response to crime, to fire, to emergency medical response, to natural and man-made disasters. And before we send a police officer out on their first 12-hour shift on armed patrol, we subject them to exacting psychological and physical tests, to a rigorous 6-month police academy, and a full year paired with a senior field training officer before we let them go out alone on the streets. So it's natural that over the years, we've put more and more stock in our professionalism. But local government isn't rocket science. It has become an area of specialized expertise, and we've developed our own indecipherable jargon and erected defensive barriers against those we think are unqualified amateurs that we don't want interfering, and sometimes they can't even understand what we do. So this increasing insulation is understandable, but it's part of why now we are viewed with such suspicion and hostility by a vocal segment of our citizens. You see, we've come to see ourselves as professional service providers, which is not unlike a vending machine. The taxpayers pay their money, and we provide the services. It becomes a business transaction, and citizens become customers. Now, customers have neither the time nor the ability to provide the services that government can give them, just like they don't make their own cars or program their own computers. To maintain the roads or fix the infrastructure or staff libraries or respond to 911 calls, we've devised this elaborate machine that delivers what we in government think you need. But I'd ask you this question. What happens when you feel shortchanged by a vending machine or it fails to deliver you what you expected when you push the button? What happens? You kick it. You shove it. I was at a rural audience one time and a fellow said, "Well, up here we'd shoot it." A vending machine has no recourse because you're completely at the mercy of an impersonal machine. There's another way to look at government. Out on the frontier, although every family needed a barn, no family on its own could build one. There was no private barns are us in those days, and there was no public Department of Barn Services to provide them. It required all the nearby families to come together as a community to raise a barn. Now, not everyone was a skilled carpenter, of course. Some did the heavy lifting. Some cooked the lunch. Some took care of the kids. And someone said a prayer to bless the work they did together. And when the barn was finished, nobody kicked it. Nobody shoved it. Nobody would shoot at it. Because it wasn't an impersonal machine. It was the product of shared labors by the entire community. Now, neither the vending machine nor the barn raising is an exact metaphor for public service in the 21st century. But for those of us in the public sector, we would serve you better if we took our inspiration from the example of the barn raising instead of the model of the vending machine. Professional skills are vital. but we should take greater pride in our idealistic core values. The work of self-government is a shared endeavor. If we don't embrace sacrifice in the service of others, then others will brand us as a self-serving elite. I have to acknowledge, of course, that we live in a society that's increasingly driven by individualistic values. And so it may sound like I'm asking public employees to be the chumps. Hey, if we don't push back against those trying to slash public employee pay and pensions, won't we squander the hard-won security and equity? And if we don't resist all these cutbacks, isn't there a great danger that public employment is going to be ravaged by the enemies of public services? I understand that fear. But I think we also have to understand the economic pain that the economic crisis has inflicted on working families, on every working family, including those who run the small businesses that are the backbone of our local communities. And so if we in the public sector don't recognize an obligation for shared sacrifice, we can hardly expect the public to vote for higher taxes when they can ill afford them. If we in the public sector don't set an example by putting the greater good ahead of our own short-term interests, how can we expect anyone else to? So, that's my message today, the challenge of reclaiming public service as an honorable calling. For 30 years, I was proud to pursue public service, and I'm proud of those who continue to work in the public sector at a time of rising animosity and declining budgets. It is a tough time to begin a career in public service, and it is a tough time to remain in public service. But we have had tough times before. In 1775, General George Washington led his defeated army into retreat outside of Philadelphia at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. He had only 12,000 troops as the snow fell on his camp. Only half of them had a blanket. Only a third of them had shoes. Over the course of the winter, 2,500 of them died from not enough to eat, from the frigid cold, and from the abysmal conditions that the Continental Congress allowed to exist. Yet, with the help of a handful of foreign volunteers, Washington trained that remaining remnant into a disciplined citizen army. And in less than 3 years, that army forced the surrender of Lord Cornwallis, marking the defeat of the world's greatest empire by a people determined to run their own country. That is the legacy that we inherit. And today's challenges obviously pale by comparison. Neither cynicism, nor polarization, nor tough economic times should prevent us from reclaiming the legacy of public service as an honorable calling. We owe that to those who suffered at Valley Forge, and we owe that to the young people in this audience who want to call public service their career. Our future depends on it. Thank you very much. So now we'll talk about that and more practical concerns. Oh, you have a question?
I have the first question. It's actually not a question. At lunch, and we've discussed this already, Rick gave me some insight actually into the role of city manager with the three parts of government. And I'd like him to talk just a little bit about that because I found it very insightful.
By design, in California, our city councils are citizen politicians. Very few of them, outside of cities like San Francisco or Los Angeles, get paid a full-time wage. They are essentially, they work for a stipend, $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And So they are, even though some of them serve for a while, particularly in cities like Camarillo, they come to it with the bias. The system is built in, a tension. They're supposed to keep an eye on the permanent workforce. They're supposed to provide oversight and direction. Meanwhile, of course, those that have spent their entire life preparing for a career in public service, who are part of professional organizations, who have initials behind their name, they do this for a living. They are not amateurs. They have a tendency to be sort of suspicious of these people who frankly don't know what we do and yet are our bosses. And guess who's in between those two groups? The professionals who think that they have a handle on what needs to be done and what it costs to do it and how it ought to be done, and the citizen politicians who think, hey, we're in charge here, we're the city council, we're the ones who make the law, we're the ones who set the policy, we're the ones who hire and fire the city manager. And the city manager is the one in between, trusted, frankly, by neither. The professionals see me as a sellout to those politicians who are playing to the audience. And the elected officials on the city council think that I'm just a cover-up, a shill, an apologist for the hidebound bureaucrats who just don't get the need to be responsive to the public. So it's a tough job, and I learned today that the fifth city manager, there are 10 cities in Ventura County, I learned this morning, it's not in the papers yet, that yet another city manager is being replaced, so we'll have half of the city run by interim city managers. So I don't want any of you to feel sorry for me. 8.5 years was a terrific opportunity for me to serve. But we don't feel sorry for the people doing the job, but have some sensitivity for how hard a job it is. And if we expect success and we expect excellence, we have to be pretty clear on what we're expecting. And that is the real challenge these days, is we want a whole bunch of things. Particularly Ventura is a real challenging environment because everyone agrees we should cut government. Cut out the frivolous stuff, cut out the unnecessary stuff, cut out the stuff I don't like, which is the stuff that other people like. So, a core service, the thing that you absolutely have to do, is anything that 100 people will come out and yell about. That's what the core service is. So everyone agrees on public safety, but then there are some people who say, the most important thing that the city provides me is a pool where my kids can swim. I don't need all this other arts programs and libraries and all that stuff. I can go to Barnes & Noble, but I need a pool. And police officers say, what in the heck are you cutting our salaries and still running a pool? I don't get it. So that's the challenge that city managers, they find themselves in the middle. And if they are decisive and opinionated and seek to be leaders, they'll eventually come to the end of their career.
Thank you, Rick. It was really close to my heart. I come from a long family of public servants. Coming out of the bounds of slavery, my great-great-grandfather was a Buffalo soldier, wounded on San Juan in Cuba. My grandfather was a postal carrier as well as a soldier. My father was a postal mechanic, and I spent 34 years working mostly for the Department of the Interior. We came with this idea of public service, this view that the reason we do what we do is for the well-being and the consideration of our fellow citizens, and with a love for that. Unfortunately, what I've seen I have now been retired for 5 years, but what I've seen over this time has become a decline not only in the ethic of public service. Part of that is accompanied by this, quote, professionalism, but also the cynicism driven by, again, at the federal level, since this is the level I work at, the unwillingness of Congress to allow you to do your job. Literally, there were times when it was like, well, we have the law in place for you to do your job, well, but we just won't fund it rather than look at it. So this is kind of a problem we have. The other thing, and please excuse my expression, but what I saw in working with counties and city governments, especially with the counties in California as well as with the state government, is they have become what I term as fee whores. And that is they begin charging more and more fees for doing what I think are basic services. And it's been also drives that disconnect between the public and those who are providing the services.
I would agree.
And I guess finally, yes, yeah. Well, finally, I just want to say that we see that when you talk about this ideal, we hear this good enough for government service. But like you talked about earlier, that used to mean that it had standards that were applied, a very different attitude than what
Sure.
we've seen. And so I guess my question for you is, looking at Ventura and how you've gone about in Ventura financing the recreation activities and to say that the change in the management of the golf courses to look like they become a revenue source as opposed to a public service for the community.
Well, some thoughtful points, and let me very quickly respond to the specific question in the context of what you called fee whores. Did any of you, any of you ever voted on a proposition in California? Just raise your hand. So would you raise your hand if you remember voting on the proposition that said that local government would primarily be funded by auto malls and shopping centers? Do you remember voting on that? What was that? Proposition? No, we didn't ever vote on that, actually. We did not. We voted on Proposition 13, which said we wanted to cut property taxes, and that was a good idea. And we voted on Proposition 218, which said we want to vote on everything, which is, I guess, a good idea. It's the law. But the one thing we don't vote on is fees. So what have we got a lot of? Fees. So it's kind of like the balloon, right? You push it in here, it's going to pop out over there. So that directly relates to the arena of recreation. We've got to pay for police and fire. That's about 55, 56% of our budget. It goes as high as 75% in some cities. So you've got to pay for that off the top, and then you've got to pay for everything else. And that doesn't leave a whole ton of money. So people are not going to raise their taxes to pay for somebody else's kids to have recreation. Just aren't. So what do? We charge fees. And what we try to do is, by law, we're not allowed to make a profit on fees, because then it's not a fee anymore. It's a tax. So that puts us in a bind, and one of the biggest headaches I'm leaving to my successor is how to reposition our golf courses, because although they make money on a day-to-day basis, the money we spent to upgrade them 10 years ago before I got here, we're still paying off, and that means that they're in the red as far as the eye can see. So if you want to lend me a couple of your business school students and want to reinvent golf courses, I'd be happy to recommend them to my successor.
Rick, I'm Paul Carter, Chair of the Speaker Committee. I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for a terrific afternoon here. And recognizing the social responsibility that you express, why would you leave when, in fact, you're exactly the kind of person we would want in that job?
Well, that's very kind of you. I left for one big reason and one small reason. The big reason was 4 city council members said it was time for me to go. And I respect that. That's their job. It's a tough job. I've had to make decisions about telling people that it's time for them to go. That comes with the territory. Those of you who are studying business are going to confront that. So I respect that. They have been a little vague on what the reason for that, and I respect that. We're not, both sides have not spent a ton of ink in the newspaper explaining why the other one is wrong, and I think that's good. I mean, that's how I've tried to uphold things, and I guess 6 of the 7 council members have done the same. The smaller reason for that is I really think of myself as a crusading idealist who's working to change government for the better. And after 15 years of being a city manager and having to cut $15 million out of a $95 million budget so we could live within our means, having to shrink our workforce by 100 people, and then try to go back and do all the things we used to do and do them better, I realized I was becoming part of the problem, right? You know, I need a fresh perspective. I need to step out of the public sector. So I'm going to follow my heart and work for my church. I'm going to be the parish administrator at the San Buenaventura Mission. And if you have never been there, it's the oldest institution in our county. It's a piece of all of our history. And I hope you'll come and visit us. But if I ever go back to public service, and I continue to have a heart for it, and will support those of you who continue in public service, I want to go back with a renewed sense of life, as people in the private sector call it, the real world. I was an entrepreneur in my youth. The business just celebrated its 25th anniversary. I have no stake in its current profits, but I'm proud of that. And it actually didn't make me a Republican, but pretty close. Meeting a payroll is something that most people in the public sector, you know, don't have a full appreciation for. Just as I think too many people in the private sector don't have an appreciation for the complexity of trying to balance regulation. So I appreciate your compliments, and really what I'm saying is public service ought to be there not as the way to pay the mortgage, but because you earn it every single day.
Wish you the best in your endeavors.
Thanks.
Rick, I'm John Payne. I live on the campus, and I'm a businessman. I heard your speech. I just wonder what your perspective is. You said you've been talking about public service and the altruistic aims of public service. But as I look at the state of California that's bankrupt, and looking at the drivers that have been driving us off a cliff, a fiscal cliff, which are simultaneously going on in the federal government, I just wonder, as a city manager, who do you blame, or what mechanism do you blame for state employee pensions, lavish pensions that are unsustainable, and then on the local level, firefighters, police, as you said, taking up 55 to 70% of your budget, and also totally burdened with retirement benefits that many times exceed what the employee was making when they were full-time on the job. How do you explain that disaster, and who do you blame?
Well, I appreciate you raising the issue, because it's a specific and profound and very tangible part of the crisis we face of confidence, particularly here in California. So let me answer it in 3 ways. First, I think it's not particularly helpful to frame it as who do we blame. Not that there aren't people responsible for it, but ultimately we have met the enemy, and it is us, right? When third basemen make $23 million a year, the country had really lost its sense of what's sustainable. We were a rich country that during the last boom pretended we were a very rich country, and we financed that by borrowing $2 billion every single day, day in, day out, $750 billion a year of foreign money, so we could buy more stuff made in China. And so I think you have to put the excesses in government in that larger context. Those excesses in 2000, 1999, can't remember, it was AB something, Assembly Bill something, passed both houses of the legislature on bipartisan votes. It was 71-8, I think, in the Assembly, and 36-2 or something in the state Senate, to sweeten pensions for public safety at the state level, to go from a sustainable pension level to an unsustainable. And how was it sold? It was sold because the stock market had just broken through 10,000 and it was going to pay for itself. The taxpayers weren't going to pay any money. The stock market was going to make us all rich. And so it was free, a sale on the future. And again, what was that being fueled by? $2 billion every day being borrowed from abroad. So that was wrong. It was unsustainable. And we are going to pay for it for a long time, and we need reform. Second piece is, for the last 5 years, I've been working on reform. I'm a member of the State League of California Cities City Manager Working Group on pension reform. We've pushed very hard. First, we pushed our elected officials across the state. They were reluctant to take on police and fire unions because when we go to the polls, if the sign says, "Police and fire support Joe Smith," who are we inclined to vote for? Joe Smith. And so if police and fire say, well, we're going to support Joe Smith if Joe Smith supports higher pensions, it's a difficult thing for Republicans or Democrats at the local level to take that on. It's getting easier now. The third piece, though, again, I think goes to this larger ethic. I really do think we made a mistake, and I think city managers were part of this problem. There's a guy named Glenn Suddard, who was an extremely able, and remains so, an extremely able public manager, did a terrific job in Claremont, got forced out through some circumstances that I won't belabor. Decided, okay, I'll go one more time, but I don't really need the job. So Indio decided to pay him $250,000 a year. Well, that's a little bit like Santa Paula paying somebody $250,000 a year, and gold-plated this and platinum-plated that, and all of a sudden that was the new standard, right? Everybody's got to keep up with the Joneses, right? Indio's got it, so Indio's a poor town. Well, certainly Rancho Mirage can pay a lot more than Indio, and so public sector salaries escalated, and then the unions, the working stiffs at the counter said, well, my city manager's making a bundle, why can't I? And so you get in this treadmill. And I think it's time to get off that treadmill. And you know, I guess maybe this is my faith speaking. The best things in life are not things. And when we put a price on success, I think we're not living up to our highest ideals.
Hi, Mr. Cole. My name is Stephen Jordan. I'm the Student Government Vice President. Thank you for speaking. My question is, how do you incentivize the youth today to join the public sector, considering the conditions in the environment seem deadlock and just so jagged compared to private sector conditions, especially wage differences?
Sure. And before I answer that, because that's an extraordinarily helpful question, and we may close on that, I should say, just so it doesn't sound like I'm just preaching, I took that to heart. So when 2009 came, I hadn't had a salary increase in three years. I took a pay cut. I said, regardless of what the unions agree to, I'm going to cut my pay by 5% for the coming year, and hope to persuade them to do the same, which they did. And then, based upon these tough pension times, I volunteered to pay 100% of my pension. Turns out I'm going to get a partial refund because it was illegal for me to volunteer to do that. Seriously, it's against the rules. But I did that until the last day. So I was taking 7% out of my regular pay voluntarily. We now have, again, persuaded all of our unions to put in 4.5% of their pay to do that. So, you know, I'm not here to blow my own horn, just simply to emphasize that I believe in this. I believe that the leaders have to set the example. The last year that the figures are available, I think there were 10 people in Ventura City government who made more than me. I was the CEO, but there are at least 10 people who were worth more than me. So now the question about So what do you say to young people, right? They look at this and they say, geez, you know, join the Roman Empire and see the world. It can be discouraging. Here I think I make two answers. The first is, don't believe everything you see on YouTube. You know, we live in a media funhouse now in which small things become big things and big things become small things. You're never going to see a headline on Yahoo News, federal government does another good job today, right? That's not going to happen. We're going to hear about the bad news, and there's a value to that because we want to know what's going wrong and we want to jump on it. But if all we ever hear about is bad news, then we think that all that there is bad news, and that's a human distortion of monumental proportions. You know, there are a lot of people who say that going to work for the Catholic Church maybe isn't the best idea, which is what I'm going to do starting November 1st. But I believe there's a wonderful legacy of people with pure hearts. Well, maybe not pure hearts, but who can reclaim and redeem what's important about that church and about our faith. And I guess I'd just share with you what motivated me. I was 8 years old when John Kennedy gave his inaugural address. And it's the first memory I have of watching somebody like that on television. I remember the inaugural parade and the black and white TV, and I remember him standing there in the cold. You could see the breath. It was a cold January 20th, 1961. And he said, few generations in history have been granted the responsibility of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from that responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this cause can light our country, and the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. Thanks very much.
I had lunch with Rick, and I was impressed with him very much, and I wasn't quite sure what he was going to do today, and frankly, I'm overwhelmed. I think it's one of the best speeches we've had in this series, so thank you very much. Don't forget, October 12th, please be back here. We're going to talk about electronic things. Talk to you later. Thank you.